Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Croglin vampire legend. Our modern idea of a vampire, a creature that has returned from death to prey on humans at night, is based on the Eastern European vampires' myths and legends, such as vampires wearing capes or turning into bats. Although vampire myths occur in almost every culture around the world, such myths are rare in England, where the idea was almost unknown until the 18th century, when reports from Europe began to surface. This particular account dates from just after the English Civil War in the 1650s. The owners of Croglin Hall in Cumberland, now Cumbria, were a family named Fisher, and the story was told to one Augustus Hare by a descendant of the family in 1896. For some reason of their own, the Fishers decided to go and live in the south of England and rent out the farm. The new tenants were two brothers and a sister named Cranswell. The new family stayed in their remote farmhouse through the first winter without event. The summer came and, that year, it was stiflingly hot, so they slept with the windows open. At that time the hall was only 1 story high, the upstairs has been built subsequently. Near the hall was a chapel and a small graveyard which once belonged to the Howard family, who were great landowners in these parts. One airless summer night the men sat with their sister watching the moon rise. After a time, they decided to go to bed. The sister lay in her bed, the bedclothes cast off because of the heat. She had closed her window, but not fastened the shutters. She gazed out of her window, propped up on her pillows as the long summer day faded out and night took its place. In Cumbria at midsummer, because it is quite far north, it does not get very dark at all between sunset and sunrise. Miss Cranswell soon became aware of 2 lights in the belt of trees some distance from the house which separated the lawn from the graveyard. She watched and, after a while, she made out a dark shape moving towards the house and towards her window. A terrible horror seized her. She wanted to get up and leave the room, but to go to the door would have meant she had to go closer to the window. Besides, she had locked the door from the inside and so would have to stand there and unlock it, all the while clearly visible to whatever was out there. Frozen to the spot, she stared at the shape, but then it turned, and instead of moving closer to her window, it started to move around the house. She jumped up and ran towards the door. Her hands were shaking so much that she found it hard to turn the key. And then her heart nearly stopped. Behind her, close to her though she didn't dare look, she heard a scratching at the window. It was outside, just feet away. She stood there petrified with fear, still not turning her head. Then she heard the sound of it unpicking the lead which held the glass in place. She forced herself to look and saw that one pane of the mullioned glass had come away and a long bony hand stretched in and turned the window catch. Whatever it was, it came in through the window with a rush and grabbed her, its fingers in her hair, its mouth at her throat. It bit her neck and forced her onto the ground. As it bit her, she screamed. Her brothers heard the noise and came and battered at the locked door. The creature looked up as the door was broken open, it turned and fled out of the window, leaving her lying on the floor, bleeding profusely from a wound at her neck. One brother clambered out of the window and went after it. But it was fast, and before he could catch it, perhaps it was lucky for him that he didn't. It disappeared into the inky blackness around the graveyard. Trying to explain the incident afterwards, the girl rationalized that the creature must have been a dangerous lunatic. But she was still horribly shocked, and her brothers took her away from Croglin to recover. They stayed away for a while, but then, as autumn came, it was she who urged them to return to Croglin. They had paid for the tenancy, and besides, she joked, it would be very bad luck to come across 2 escaped lunatics. They returned to Croglin and spent the winter there. She had the same room, but always closed the wooden shutters. The brothers took to carrying loaded pistols with them around the house. But nothing happened until one night in March. The sister was lying in bed when she heard a terribly familiar scratching at the window. She struggled to get fully awake and scrabbled for a candle and something to light it with. When she got a flame, she saw that the shutters were opened. Staring in at her was a brown shriveled face. She saw its long bony hands picking at the lead of the windows. This time she screamed immediately. Her brothers rushed in with their pistols. She pointed to the window, but the creature had gone. The brothers ran out of the front door and saw it moving across the lawn towards the graveyard. They fired and one of them hit it in the leg. It scrambled away into the darkness and they lost it. The next day the brothers summoned their neighbors, and with their help they went into the graveyard. The tenants of nearby Croglin Hall had also been suffering visits from it, and their young daughter had bite wounds at the throat. The father had thought that she had been bitten by a rat, but when the Cranswells said what had happened to their sister, they feared the worst and the father joined the party as it made its way to the graveyard. One of the locals had heard rumors of a particular vault being home to some monster, so they opened it up. They stood around, pistols and other weapons at the ready. The vault was full of coffins, but most were smashed, and the remains mangled and strewn across the floor. Only one coffin was undisturbed. They lifted the lid and there they saw the mummified and shriveled figure that had moved as if alive the night before. To confirm what they feared, they looked at the leg and found a recent wound from a pistol ball. There and then they set fire to the dry coffin and burnt the vampire in it. In his book Ghosts and Legends of the Lake District, J. A. Brooks tells that in the early years of this century the tenants of Croglin Hall had to deal with a fire in the dining room chimney. When the fire died down and they were rebuilding the chimney, they found an ancient burnt corpse in there. Though the tenant wanted to rebury the corpse in a churchyard with proper Christian rites, he died before he was able to do this. Some people think that the corpse is still there in the chimney. Augustus Hare, who had the story printed, said he heard it from a Captain Fisher who leased the property after the Cranswells. He dated the events to around 1875. This immediately aroused suspicion that he had actually adapted certain sequences in a penny dreadful novel, possibly by James Malcolm Rymer, Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood, published in 1847. Penny dreadfuls were deliberately sensational. The books sold for a penny, often authors did not want to admit they wrote them. In 1924, Charles G. Harper decided to challenge Hare's account of the vampire. He went to Cumberland and could not find Croglin Grange, although he found both a Croglin Hall and a Croglin Hall. There was no church nearby. The closest was a mile away. There was no vault as described by the brothers and the villagers. Later a man called F. Clive Ross visited the area and in turn challenged Harper's findings. He interviewed the local people and deduced that Croglin Hall was the Grange. He also noted that a chapel had existed near the house and its foundation stones were still there in the 1930s. Then in 1968, D. Scott Rogo, a writer, using a book published in 1929 that contained both stories, concluded that it was likely that one story was based upon the other and therefore Croglin Grange was most likely a hoax. However, some years later F. Clive Ross found a witness, Mrs. Parkin, who lived at Slack Cottage in A. Stable, who said she had known one of the Fishers. However, this gentleman was born in the 1860s, had heard the story from his grandparents. Mrs. Parkin also said that according to the deeds of Croglin Hall, it was commonly called Croglin Grange until 1720. So, Hare had made a huge blunder. If the story had taken place, it was 2 centuries earlier, in 1680 to 1700, not the 1870s. Clive Ross published his research in Tomorrow magazine, spring 1963. More recent research by Lionel Fanthorpe also suggests that the events took place in the late 1600s. A vault close to the Grange was demolished during Cromwell's time. Hence these findings place the events before the publication of Varney the Vampire. So what exactly happened? We shall never know. It is possible that Varney's author heard the legend and decided to write about it as a penny dreadful. It was said the book was based on events that took place during the reign of Queen Anne, 1702–14, near the time of the incident. Maybe Hare used Varney the Vampire for his book, or perhaps he heard about the legend independently and wrote his own account. Whatever the truth, the Croglin beast will remain a mystery.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.